Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive on the situation in Bangladesh. There's been a revolution, a new interim government, and there's just a ton of information out there. A lot of it's true, a lot of it's not. So how do you cut through all the noise? That's what we're going to try to do today. We've got a really interesting interview with someone inside the government, a presentation on how this is even spilling over into U.S. politics, and more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're not just dealing with facts on the ground. We're also looking at how narratives are being built internationally and even weaponized sometimes.
Okay, so let's start with that perspective from inside Bangladesh. Our first source is an interview with Shafiqul. He's the press secretary to the chief advisor of the interim government. And this isn't just some career bureaucrat. Alam was a veteran journalist, and he actually took a huge pay cut to take this job.
Wow. That right there tells you something about what's going on. This isn't just a job for him.
Exactly. And he really doesn't hold back on the challenges that they're facing. He describes this massive misinformation campaign that they're up against, mostly coming from India. It paints a very distorted picture of what the interim government is actually doing. He even said they'd need a team of like 200 people just to counter all the false information that's out there.
200 people, that's a crazy number.
Yeah.
It really shows you the scale of this information war. And how can any government, especially one in transition, possibly keep up?
It's a good question. Alam's clearly frustrated by the lack of resources, the bureaucracy, and also just the fact that Bangladesh doesn't really have these strong, independent fact-checking organizations yet. He actually uses the term information warfare a couple of times.
Yeah, I can see why he uses that term.
Yeah.
This isn't just online arguments. The stakes are so high. Alam is arguing that this misinformation could actually destabilize the entire country, maybe even incite violence, because it creates this distrust. He even compares it to what happened during the Rohingya crisis, where, false narratives led to real-world harm.
Yeah, it's scary how easily people can be manipulated when they don't have a full story. He actually gives this one specific example, a report that massively inflated the number of attacks on minorities they investigated, and most of those incidents weren't even related to religious violence. But that report's already circulating internationally, creating this really damaging image.
It's so frustrating. That's the thing about misinformation. Even when it's debunked, the damage is often already done. It makes you realize how important media literacy is for everyone to be able to look at the information they're reading and critically evaluate it.
So what is the solution? What does he propose? Well, Alam actually calls for more transparency and more openness. He says the interim government has invited international journalists and human rights groups to come to Bangladesh to see the situation for themselves. But so far, very few have taken them up on the offer.
Huh. I wonder why. Do you think there's a hesitation because of fear of being manipulated themselves? Or is there something else going on? Like,
Oh,
what factors are preventing a more robust international response?
that's a great question. It makes you think about the power dynamics at play here. Like Bangladesh needs that international support to counter these narratives.
Yeah.
But there might also be some powerful actors who benefit from the instability.
Yeah, for sure. And what's even more concerning is that this misinformation isn't just staying within Bangladesh. It's impacting politics in other countries, too. Our next source actually digs into how it's affecting the U.S.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting. We've got a presentation by Trish from the Bangladesh-U.S. Alliance, and she uncovers something pretty alarming. There's this resolution called NH-Res 11 that's been introduced in the New Hampshire legislature, and it's full of these same distorted claims that Alam was just talking about.
Wow, so these narratives are being woven into official policy. It's not just chatter on social media anymore. This could actually shape decisions at a governmental level.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this, too. The main sponsor of this resolution is a Bangladeshi American representative named Abul Khan. And Trish's presentation raises some serious questions about his motivations and potential ties to the old regime that was overthrown.
So you're saying there might be internal political struggles even within the Bangladeshi diaspora, and it's playing out on the U.S. political stage.
Yeah, it's a deep dive for sure. So Trish breaks down the key claims of the resolution, showing how they go against what we've heard from Alam and what a recent UN human rights report found.
Right, that UN report's a really credible source. It documents human rights abuses by the previous regime, especially the violence against the protesters. But it explicitly says there wasn't a state-sponsored genocide or persecution of minorities. So that basically dismantles the entire foundation of this resolution.
And yet it's still moving forward. Trish explains if it passes, it could have some serious consequences. Damage to Bangladesh's reputation, a skewed U.S. foreign policy towards Bangladesh, and would also lend legitimacy to these harmful narratives globally.
Ugh, and she's saying this might just be the beginning. Her research indicates that similar resolutions could pop up in other states. She specifically mentioned Michigan as a possibility.
So we've got this complex situation inside Bangladesh. And now we see how it's tangled up with politics here in the U.S. Where do we go from here? What does this mean for Bangladesh? And for all of us just trying to understand what's actually going on.
Yeah. It feels like we're really getting a crash course in how interconnected everything is. What happens in Bangladesh doesn't stay in Bangladesh. There are these ripples, and now we see how they can even reach all the way to the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about the negative side of things. I mean, Alama highlighted some promising initiatives that the interim government's working on. They're trying to tackle this on multiple fronts, not just focusing on the information war.
Right, he talked about boosting the economy. What
Hmm.
really stood out to me was how he emphasized improving the efficiency of the Chittagong port,
Huh?
which is, vital for their trade. Yeah, that's a smart move. If they can attract more foreign investment and create more jobs, that would have a really stabilizing effect on the whole country.
And it's not just about attracting any investment. They're also working on raising labor standards to meet international requirements.
That's a big deal. It shows a real commitment to sustainable development, not just short-term gains that could end up exploiting workers. It's a sign that they're thinking long-term, about
Yeah.
building a more just and equitable society.
It's almost like they're trying to build a stronger foundation from within so that they're less vulnerable to all these external pressures like this misinformation campaign.
Exactly. Oh, and here's another interesting development. Allah mentioned a new political party formed by the student leaders who actually led the revolution. It's called the National Citizens Party, or NCP for short.
Hmm.
They're positioning themselves as this kind of centrist force.
That is fascinating. So you have this whole new generation of leaders stepping onto the scene. I'm really curious to see how they navigate this complex landscape. Do you think they have a real shot at bringing about lasting change?
I think it's too early to say for sure, but their emergence is definitely a sign that the political landscape is shifting. They represent a break from the old guard. And their success is really going to depend on their ability to connect with voters and articulate a clear vision for the future.
So we've got the interim government battling this misinformation, this new party trying to establish itself. And then there's that UN human rights report that we talked about. That report can't be ignored.
It's such a powerful document. Not only did it condemn the actions of the previous regime, especially, the violence against protesters, but it also validated the claims of those who supported the revolution. It's a form of accountability on the international stage.
Right, and it sends a clear message. The world is watching what happens in Bangladesh.
Yes.
This isn't something that they could just sweep under the rug.
That international pressure is so crucial. It can act as a deterrent against further abuses and can help ensure a more transparent and fair transition of power.
So we've got all these different forces at play. It feels like a really pivotal moment for Bangladesh. The choices that are made now by the interim government, by this new party, by the international community, it's all going to have a lasting impact.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even though Bangladesh might seem far away, what happens there has implications for all of us.
Right. So if you're listening to this, you might be wondering, okay, why should I care about this? Why does any of this matter to me?
Well, in today's world, we're all connected. The fight against misinformation, the struggle for human rights, the quest for a more just and equitable world, these are global challenges. What happens in one corner of the world affects us all, even if we don't see it immediately.
Trish actually ended her presentation with a call to action. She urged everyone to reach out to their policymakers, to share accurate information about Bangladesh, and to support organizations that are fighting disinformation.
Yeah, she made a really good point. We're not powerless in this situation. We all have a role to play. We can be informed citizens. We can speak out against injustice. And we can support those who are working for positive change.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming, can it? Trying to stay informed when there's just so much noise, so much spin.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like the more we understand about these situations, the more we can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive into Bangladesh has really highlighted that for me. It's like a case study in the power of information, both for good and for bad.
Yeah, you realize that being an informed citizen, it isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about being able to think critically,
Yeah.
to evaluate information, to recognize bias, to figure out what's true and what's false.
Right. It's like building a muscle, that critical thinking muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And in this day and age, it's a muscle we all really need.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to this question. How do we ensure that truth actually wins out? Not just in Bangladesh, but everywhere. in a world where information is so easily manipulated?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I've been thinking about it a lot, too. I don't think there's any easy answer. But maybe the first step is just acknowledging the problem, recognizing that we all have biases. We're all susceptible to misinformation in some way.
Right, and then, like you said, we need to work on that critical thinking muscle,
Huh.
asking questions, challenging our assumptions,
Yeah.
seeking out different perspectives.
Exactly. And we can't do this alone. We need to talk to each other, even have those difficult conversations with people who might see things differently. We have to build bridges, not walls.
Yeah, it's a collective effort, for sure. We all have a responsibility to be part of the solution.
And even though the challenges are real, I'm still optimistic. There are so many people and organizations out there fighting misinformation, promoting transparency, and advocating for truth and justice.
Their work is so important, and I think each of us, in our own way, can support that work.
Right. So as we wrap up, just remember to keep learning, keep asking questions, keep engaging.
Don't be afraid to challenge the narratives you hear out there. Be a champion for the truth in your own life and in the wider world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.